Welcome back to Stepwise, a series of deep conversations with inspiring leaders about who they are, how they see the world, and their journeys that have influenced their worldviews and values. Today's guest is very special to me in many ways. She's a leading practitioner in healthy, sustainable cultures, teams, and leadership. That by itself would make this a must listen. She's also the managing principal of Evolution, a consulting firm dedicated to the same, with an impressive client list, many of whom are leading edge companies in the tech space. She's an author, an entrepreneur, with a personal brand of wholeness at work and is worth following. She also worked at FMG Leading, my firm, for over 10 years. And finally, she's someone I sit down with for birthdays, Thanksgiving meals, and the like. Today's guest is Erin Rocchio, my daughter. In today's session, several things stand out. The absolute mandate for leaders doing their internal work for leading in today's dynamic and challenging climate. Her take on the many environmental forces collapsing in the workplace, like social media, the news cycle, globalization, all pressurizing today's organizations and its leaders. Self-protection as a coping strategy versus meeting the moment with a higher call of leadership and what that higher call entails. And why the traditional hierarchical or power over paradigm is no longer useful and in fact is likely harmful to people and organizations. I hope you enjoy this fun conversation with Erin as much as I did. Impossible, says a proud dad. Nonetheless, it's a worthy listen.
Today, I hold some new roles. So I'm now one of the managing partners at Evolution, which is a coaching firm mostly focused on tech and high growth companies. I'm the founder of Wholeness at Work, which is I'll call it a creative product business to support my coaching work that focuses on burnout and resources for coaches in supporting people through burnout. And I'm a mom of two, daughter to you,
Yay.
community builder, investor, and someone deeply committed to sustainability and well-being.
Wonderful. I'm just so thrilled with who you are and where you are and the contribution you make in the world. And it's really because of that contribution I wanted to so desperately to talk to you, because you are out dealing with a lot of leaders who are facing some extraordinary challenges. We could argue that these are unprecedented. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but they are significant challenges. When you think about the many factors, what do you see the leaders that you're working with most affected by?
One of the meta trends that I am aware of is there's been a collapsing of the kind of global and social environment into organizational life. Social media could be a factor. I think our news cycle is a factor. I think, increased globalization and connectivity in general is a factor. But organizations used to be buffered from the world at large. And now people are bringing all of their external realities into the workplace. And it's causing a lot of it's like an awakening for organizational leaders that have not been equipped or trained to deal with some of these broader issues. And they're now being demanded that they do from their workforce. And I think that's putting incredible pressure on an already pressurized leadership group. And I will say in some instances, they should be pressured to deal with these things, right? In the case of equity, they should be thinking about this in a different way and be challenged and provoked. I call it positively provoked. They should be pushed and stretched in certain ways. And at the same time, it's also incredibly overwhelming. And so many of the organizational leaders I work with are also, I would say, if they didn't come into the pandemic, let's just use the last 2 years. If they didn't come into the pandemic equipped with personal practices for well-being, for mindfulness, for self-regulation and emotional intelligence, they're in trouble because they're now fighting on all these fronts and they don't have the ability to restore and renew. They're in deep trouble. So now they're like going through their own burnout and fatigue, and I would say cynicism. And then that causes off, as you well know, a retraction and pull towards self-protection instead of that higher call of leadership, of like meeting the moment, being of service, and meeting the people where they're at with like a broader level of awareness and resourcing. They go in.
You make a number of important points, one of which is these leaders are feeling the same pressures themselves. They're dealing with all of the same pressures that their workforce is. And the other piece, a temporal notion of like if they hadn't if they hadn't been on the journey, if they hadn't been preparing for a different kind of leadership prior to the pandemic, which is, by the way, the kind of the fourth or fifth turning, the fourth or fifth major disruption in the 21st century. Every 4 or 5 years, we have one, maybe not quite as extreme or as impactful as that one, maybe. But if they didn't have those skills before, they're behind. They're behind. I don't want to say they're, they're kind of desperate, but it may feel that way. It may feel that way. My thesis here, Erin, I'd love you to weigh in on it, is that this time and these pressures require a different nature of relationship between leader and follower. Maybe it is a much more genuine one. Maybe it is a much more human and authentic one. Maybe it's more empathic and connected one rather than a power over. It's a power with, and a really power with on steroids, that we're all bringing our humanity into work. And I'd love you to kind of comment on that because I know this is a lot of your practice.
I literally was having this conversation this morning with a client that says, we have so much lived experience and academic research to show that the old model of hierarchical, dominant, power over leadership model, the old way of leading, does not work and is harmful. And both men and women that I work with today are feeling that acutely. Like, if you were only trained in the old model, you look at our new workforce and you go, what the heck? I don't know how to deal with these people. They must be bad.
If they were trained at all,
True.
because some may just still, by position, we deal with a lot in the investor world. And so they're investors and they're great analysts and now they're running companies and they may not have any training at all. So they're intuiting their way through and
It's all gut. Yeah.
it's not pretty.
Absolutely. Yeah, great point. When I say training, I also even mean just like social conditioning, right? Like, we all get training some way, but most of these people have never had formal training. So it's a lot of our work. My work with them is on one, exposing some of these mental models that they've adopted and then transforming them. And, so the new way is what you're describing, in my opinion, which is relational. It's collaborative. It's also incredibly humble. And I think the only thing that we haven't covered yet that I would add to your thesis is that it's also conscious. That's a tricky word, though, because that word has gotten co-opted by some fringe people. What I mean by consciousness is kind of continual awakening of self and other, right? And so it's like, how can I become more and more aware of my patterning and my history, my past, and how that's living inside me today so that I can really consciously and thoughtfully move into the future with you, that's based on my values and my choices, not my past trauma. It's such a deep word, that in and of itself. There's so many facets to it, as you know. So this is another place where personal development and leadership development, and you've been in this business doing this work for 30 years. And now I think we have to call it that. Like, you can't be a leader today not doing personal development. You just can't.
It's hard to imagine operating in this society without doing some sort of personal development.
True. Exactly.
One of the thoughts that occurred to me, a very cynical one, we've been trying to teach people more conscious approaches to conflict for many years. And it feels as though we've gone completely backwards and off the reservation societally with the loss of civility. Binary thinking, my way or no way. My way or you're stupid or bad, you're flawed. A lot of shaming. That's our meta societal messages these days. And yet we're asking leaders to behave leaders of businesses that we work with and nonprofits, I guess, but more contrasting, leaders of businesses to act in a more aware, and I'll use a different word than conscious, although I love the word, is intentional. To be intentional and align who you are and what you say is important to you with your actions and your accountabilities and all that kind of stuff. But it's just struck me that it's, like, oh, all that work. And now we're
If you only look at the evidence externally, you could easily make that conclusion or come to that conclusion. This is one of the reasons I'm such a nerd for integral theory, because it looks at the backlash that we're seeing as part of spiral development. So we're still moving forward, But what's happening at the collective level of awareness feels a bit like a whiplash. And this is how we grow as a society. And I am not smart enough to talk about the meta society and how our level of consciousness as a whole, but there are some really powerful thinkers on that topic. I just think that organizational leaders, like let's think about, for example, a founder or someone who's only been to business school and is coming in to be a level leader of a small and growing company, right? So they're coming in thinking about product, or they're thinking about, the service that they're going to be developing and offering in their business. And they don't realize that all this other stuff gets included in leading other human beings. And then you throw in scale or hypergrowth, and then you throw in what feels like social collapse, the collapse of democracy, right? In the fourth turning language. And it's like, holy cow, it's a lot of work. And I really don't think any of us are built or meant to do this alone, which is why I think that the work that we do with teams is becoming more and more central. So I used to be, and I still love one on one coaching deeply. Executive coaching is critical. But I've become more and more passionate about building healthy team containers more than ever, because executives cannot treat this as an individual sport anymore.
Could you explain this notion of the spiral path or spiral learning versus loop learning, however you distinguish it?
So Ken Wilber and integral theory really are so complex, and I will just speak to it briefly, which is that, one, we're always learning, and we have different levels of consciousness or awareness. And that sometimes part of our move forward includes, he calls it transcend and include. So if we've skipped a level in our development, we have to go back and learn that and include it to transcend. This is true for individuals, groups, societies.
Otherwise, we stay stuck or regress, or what's the otherwise?
My theory is that we're always developing, and we're in the theory of evolution. We're always moving forward. And so this is just the way in which that happens. The other alternative is that you languish and die, metaphorically or physically. So you're either developing or you stagnate and die. And the death could be spiritual, or you're not contributing to society, right? It doesn't have to be literal or physical. So transcend and include means I'm going back and I'm making sure that some of these aspects of myself that haven't been looked at or healed or worked through, that I'm addressing them, I'm understanding them, I'm meeting them with compassion, and then I'm including them as I develop. So for example, if I'm leading a team and I've learned to be an amazing communicator, yet if somebody questions something I'm saying publicly, makes me snap, like that's my pattern, I get super reactive, that's going to really limit my ability to impact a group. So part of transcend and include in this context would be, I've got to go and understand and meet that part of myself with compassion of like, what am I afraid of? And okay, let me tend to that and nurture that and understand it, therapy, coaching, all kinds of development around it. Now I can include it and go, okay, there is a part of me that I don't have to reject. There is a part of me that cares that you respect me, and that's okay. How do I work with that so that I can elevate myself and be more intentional, to use your language, in my communication instead of reactive? So I don't know, we're getting a little esoteric.
No, I'm glad, because this all assumes and implies growth and development of leaders to higher levels of awareness, awakeness, consciousness, intention, alignment. And Wilbur's thinking about that transcendence is really an important piece for us. In this environment requiring greater awareness and awakeness and connection, collaboration, and humility, tell me a story about a leader who's doing it really well.
So there's a couple of leaders that I just point to as inspirations to me, quite frankly. I'll talk about one I haven't talked about before publicly. I'm not going to share her name, but she is a global tech leader. Worked with her now at a couple of companies. And I think there's two things that she does really well. So she's naturally wired around building systems and process. She knows how to execute and build really robust teams. to make all the things we're talking about happen in reality, which is important. So that's her superpower. She does that in her sleep. The thing that's been really important to watch is when George Floyd was murdered. This is a white woman, by the way, leading a global talent team, people team. So when George Floyd was murdered, she was like, oh my God, I need to go back and do a lot of learning. She went back and got a master's degree in DEI. She has enlisted the support of really incredible, talented people in all the areas. So, humility. She's like, I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And she surrounds herself with really talented, brilliant people that round her out. But the other thing she's done is she's really taken on and been a crusader around mental health. So, this is something that's affected her personally. It's affecting her currently in her family. And she has been incredibly vulnerable and transparent about her own journey with mental health challenges. She means it when she says that she prioritizes her employees' mental health. We've done a ton of work around sustainable performance and burnout, she and I. And she's one of the few executives, so a global tech executive, you can imagine, doesn't work weekends, doesn't work evenings, takes off time. Now she's incredibly effective though. When she's working, most effective person. But her kid's having a mental health challenge. She takes time off and supports her kid. And it creates such a level of humanity and like compassion in her team as they've been weathering the last few years and they've been holding all of the pain and angst for their whole company. They've needed support. And she's not just providing support, but she's also role modeling. And that role modeling around this topic in particular of mental health is so rare that she's been incredibly empowering and inspiring to me. So you talk about authenticity. I mean, this woman is right out front. She doesn't pull any punches. She's so incredibly genuine. And her followership is so high.
This is obviously an exceptional leader. What are the antecedents? What are the things that enable her to be so humble and vulnerable and open and connected? Like, you don't show up in the workplace that day one. What are the things that have to come first or enable that in your estimation or your observation?
I'd say this goes beyond just her. I think in general, I wish it weren't so, but I think the people that role model and embody this the best, and this being kind of humble, wise, self aware leadership oriented around service and contribution, low ego, have gone through significant hardship. I have yet to meet anybody who hasn't felt that they've gone through some sort of psychic or spiritual death and emerged on the other side and been really powerfully shaped by that. That experience and walking through the fire and surviving, and not surviving out of like will and force, but like letting yourself be changed by life. She's one person I know that resembles that, but I think that is a broader view of what it takes. That's an enabler.
That's very important. I'd love to ask a question here and then have you continue on. We do a lot of work with physician leaders for whom they were the top of their college classes and they go into med school and they go through the trials of fire there, but they've probably never failed, especially as a leader, because they're chosen for their perhaps clinical superiority, maybe. Yeah, how do you deal with somebody who hasn't had the failure crucible that you describe as so important in our development?
And this is where I kind of widen my lens a bit, because I I don't know that I agree that they haven't failed or haven't been through something. I think that they're probably just looking at it through a narrow lens of I haven't been through anything hard in my career because I've been successful. Then I open it up and I go, tell me about your marriage. Tell me about your family of origin. Tell me about the journey to get you here. I work with physician leaders too, and they go through a lot. Most of them that I know have something that feels like a soft spot. That's what I tap into and have them, instead of exclude that from their leadership conversation, we bring it in. So that's a source for them of like, okay, I have gone through something hard. I do have an area where I feel less powerful. I feel helpless even. Now I can come to my leadership role with more empathy. I don't think empathy is really possible until you've gone through something like that, right? So not to say I'm like out trying to hunt for pain, but I want to just include the wholeness of who they are. Yeah. So this person in particular, so we're talking about crucible moments in general for people. Another thing that was really helpful for this client in particular is that having a really supportive boss relationship. So whoever's in power says you can bring all that here and you're safe. Your job is secure and I have your back. Allowed many of the clients that I know that have done this to really bring their whole self in a way that they couldn't before. So if the boss is not actively and intentionally in communication about all the things we've described and is able to like maturely hold it, they're not going to feel that psychological safety to then say, well, let me talk to you about my mental health, because then suddenly their job's at risk. So that also, it's like leaders can embody this when they also have an environment around them with other conscious leaders or other mindful and aware, wise leaders who know how to deal with big emotions.
Other antecedents, you talked about the word trust, talked about psychological safety. What are the things that allow us in the workplace to be ourselves, and then we'll talk about how that relates to us performing, but what are the other antecedents that you can think of?
I think the third one for me is curiosity. So if you've got safety and you're coming in with a level of kind of beaten up by life, but you've endured and you're resilient and you're broken open is one way I describe it, right? So you're already open and you're safe to do so. Now I can be curious about myself and other people in a way that I can really get deep. Like I can deeply understand myself. I can deeply understand you. I can deeply understand our market, the environment. I can explore these ideas. I can explore innovative solutions to things. Like always be seeking that quest to learn, that hunger. Like I'm never satisfied with what I know. I'm always like, there's a question that I love asking people. It's like, what do I not yet know? I think that is such a powerful leadership question. I almost want to tattoo it. What do I not yet know? The answer is always like, there's always more we don't know. So to hold that allows me to come in again with humility and openness to be like, I have so much to learn from you. I would want every leader to come in to their team and their quote unquote followers. Like, what do I have to learn from you? Versus the old model, which is I have to be the expert and know. That sets up everybody for failure, especially the leader, by the way, because then people don't tell them the truth.
Once again, takes awareness, consciousness, maturity, self-confidence. For me to be curious about something that's going on in an area that, I'll talk about a founder perspective or a CEO perspective. I came up through the clinical side, or I came up through that side. I know everything. I built the department. Now I'm going in and I'm asking the head of that department very open questions, not leading, not judgmental. Tell me about, show me how this works. What do I need to know more of? Help me understand your viewpoint of it without trying to necessarily shape it into something I can understand because I can understand it.
Yeah, I think inquiry in general as a tool is probably one of the most important things, all of us as human beings, but especially those of us with power. It's one of the most powerful stances to come in and say, tell me, show me, and ask questions. That is so profound. And if we had people do that more, it would change the world. I'm
Well, I
convinced.
think so. I'm convinced with you. So we've been poking around the edges and actually dealing pretty directly with this notion of kind of greater authenticity and genuine relationships and connectedness and more humanity in leadership and how leaders show up. When you think about authenticity, what does it mean to you?
So I'm going to speak from the language that I know well, which is the Enneagram. So in the land of my personality type, authenticity says I'm willing to sacrifice my image, what you think about me, for how I actually feel and believe and think. So there's the truth of who I am versus the image I'm managing. And authenticity says I'm willing to give up my image in service of my truth. And that's really scary for most of us.
Or as an Enneagram 2, I'm willing to risk connectedness with you in order to share and show up as the person or the feelings that I have right now.
When we're really being our honest self, like our more essential self, we're depending on our personality type, we're putting something at risk, whether it's certainty or safety or connection or image or belonging. We're putting something at risk. And now, often, I've seen when we are genuine or authentic, those things actually get stronger. So if I cared about my image before and I'm actually honest with you, often that has a boost, ironically, in how people perceive me.
I love this inclusion because it's very important. What are you willing to risk to truly share what you're thinking, feeling, needing, wanting, whatever? I am authentic if I say candid, honest relationships matter, and I'm willing to put anything at risk in support of that. Like I'm a 3 and I don't like to have my image challenged or thought lesser of, but I'm feeling very vulnerable right now because I want something. It looks like we have great differences of opinion. I'd rather go home and hide and get under the blankets. We need to hash it out right now. That's really more aligned with my personal values, my personal story, my sense of self, all of that stuff. So being authentic means authentic to something, authentic to a true north, authentic to purpose, values, something like that.
Yeah. So kind of like the word that I hear in that is like integrity.
Yeah, I think integrity in this definition plays in a lot. And I'd love you to weigh in what the boundaries of that are. Now, here's what's behind that question. In relationships, especially in ones that really matter to me, like leader follower or family members, when emotions are involved, I process things very slowly. I need my morning pages to sit and kind of slow down, get some breath in, get some insight in, get some time in, get some perspective in, and then I can process some stuff. So the reason I ask you a question about the kind of the edges or boundaries of authenticity, because if I said in the moment, we're in a heated conversation, I said stuff in the moment under the guise of, well, I'm just being authentic. No, I'm being triggered. I'm being emotional. I've not processed things through. So what's coming out isn't necessarily my truth. It is my hurt, or it is my emotion, or it is something. So where do we, especially in business, begin to configure lines around or boundaries around this question about authentic, genuine relationships?
One, I couldn't agree more with where this question's coming from because I know there's a huge push toward, there's a few things that are really popular in the business world, like grit. And I have a lot of problems with that overall. Right, if you leave it unbridled, radical candor, if that's unbridled, I have a lot of problems with that. I mean, it's so weaponized, I can't even tell you. So my quick response to you is my genuine response, which is I'm a huge believer in the pause. It's okay. I prefer for people to be authentic, they have to slow down and have a deep connection to themselves. If you're not connected to yourself and you're not regulating yourself, you can't actually be authentic in relationship with me.
Okay, say that again because that is freaking brilliant.
If you're not connected to yourself and regulating yourself, you cannot be authentic in your connection with me. You just can't. Because then what's happening is, like you said, what I'm receiving is a whole bunch of projection and reaction. Projection and reaction is all the brain going, I have to survive this moment. Survival is not authenticity.
So the reality that I'm experiencing in my brain in those moments as my pulse is racing and I'm in fight or flight or I'm in self protection and I'm saying what is here, what's so for me in that moment may not necessarily be real and maybe may prevent us from having authentic relationships.
I would say it's legitimate and valid in the moment that you're having that reaction, but if we're just spewing out in those moments in an unregulated way, then what we're actually doing is causing harm to our relationships. Part of the premise I'm hearing you work your way into, or I'm working my way into, is not just authenticity, it's authentic relationship. Authentic relationship requires that we're both managing ourselves in those moments of threat. Then when I communicate with you, let's say I've done my morning pages and I've meditated and I've walked out in my garden and now I'm feeling grounded and centered. Only now can I access my values and my real deeper commitments. So then I can go, yeah, what you said really ticked me off, but that's not the truth of what I really want to say to you right now. What I really want to say to you is I'm afraid. And that's authentic relationship, right? That shit moves mountains. But if I'm just going out and spew, 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 I'm not effective. I'm creating harm and I'm creating more of the kind of muck and violence, quite frankly, in my communication. I don't want that.
I just got hit with a big feeling of sadness because isn't that spewing exactly what our younger generation experience moment to moment through social media? There's no process, there's no groundedness. It is instantaneous spewing. That means that the relationships they have with others, a relationship they have with themselves, a relationship they have to an issue is based on that spewing and not reality.
As someone who engages on social media, there's a resonance you can feel with someone who's communicating from a place of regulation and centeredness. This is what I think we need to work on with younger people. It's not that social media is bad, tech is not bad inherently, but it's our relationship to it and getting more and more discerning or thoughtful about what we're listening to. And also, like, if we notice, you can tell on social media if you're reading an account and it's just like spew, 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 move on. Don't get sucked in, because then now their dysregulation's now telling your brain, I'm not safe and I'm under threat. And now I'm getting dysregulated. And now we're like in a storm together. And that does nobody any good.
I haven't told you this, but it's a rule I've adopted later in life, in fact, very recently, that if I hear or read somebody who is disparaging somebody else about a problem or their view of a problem, that person is not a serious actor and I just dismiss them. And like, you're not interested in solving the problem. You're interested in disparaging. You're interested in power over. You're interested in making your point of view better. I don't have any interest in you. Now, genuinely, if you and I have different opinion, let's hash it out in the spirit of inquiry, in the spirit of discovery, in the spirit of learning, the spirit of openness and humility. Now I'm in. And nobody's going to be more intense and in than I am. I find it's a very narrow pathway. Not a lot of people can go through that piece. That you and I can have an honest, legitimate, forwarding disagreement about something.
And the way I know, just to kind of double click on what you're saying, which I love, the way I know, besides the words they're using, my body also tells me if that person's safe or not. So I can tell, okay, they're really here to solve this problem with me. My body feels at ease. Or they're here to attack and criticize and, I don't know, shame. Ooh, my body knows instantly. And I'm like, bye bye. I can't be in dialogue and be an authentic relationship with you.
A question that I always ask everybody that I talk to, at least especially in this forum, what are you reading? What are you listening to? What are you taking in these days for your learning and development? And do you have any references that you could share with others?
Yeah. So I would say I'm in a particularly acute season of life where my time to read is limited. So what I get the most out of quiet time,
Mm, beautiful.
honestly. Like I need more time to process than I need to take in more input. I get too much input. So like less is more for me right now. So I can't give you like a slew of books. Now I have a lot of unread books that are on my nightstand. The thing that I am finding that the most accessible are articles. I do really well in written form. There's a ton of great resources that way because then it helps me have I love frameworks. It helps me get my mind around it. It takes me out of the like stress of social media. The one book I will say just that feels related to your topic that I loved and it was hugely instrumental for me in the past couple of years, which I don't know if I've shared it with you, is The Way of Integrity by Martha Beck. I had like 5 people recommend it to me, and I finally said, "Okay, fine." It was really great.
Well, Erin, thank you very
I know.
much.
I love you.
I love you too. Bye. For a deeper exploration of your own journey, you can find tools, stories, and reflection questions in my book, Leadership: Rethinking the True Path to Great Leading, or by following me on social media. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram as Foster Mobley. Until next time, Stepwise.
Thank you for listening to Stepwise. Stepwise is brought to you by Dr. Foster Mobley. Edited and promoted by Zetis. You can listen to more episodes wherever you stream podcasts. Find out more at fostermobleymt.com or follow us on social media at Foster Mobley. That's FOSTERMOBLEY. We look forward to having an inspiring conversation with you soon.